if I hit play, actually just zoom out a little bit here, I don't want to get beyond the scope of my actual sky dome. In fact, actually what I could do is just turn on the backface culling. So let me just do that. Display options, I'll use performance and backface cull so I can kind of see outside of my dome when the faces are pointing in the opposite direction of my camera. So I've got an emission working here. If I extend frame count perhaps to 500 frames, I have a bunch of particles emitting off, and the reason into space, and the reason they're emitting so slowly is because my grid space is quite large. This set is a large piece of geometry. Just to give you an idea, if I hit Control-Shift-S and access my visual cues and my rulers, you get a sense of the size of our set here. So it's well over 200, let's say almost 400 units large. So the speed of the particles at 5 units per second certainly aren't traveling very far. What I want to do is actually reduce the number of particles that I've got, and I want to emit a total number. So right away in the emit from surface compound, I'll set the rate from number of particles per second to total number of particles, and I'll emit a rate of, let's say, 25 particles. We'll be able to change this as we go. I also want the particles to have an actual volume to them, so the shape will be set to, say, spherical for now. We can randomize that spherical shape. We'll be actually replacing shape with instances. And that should be good enough. If I increase the speed a little bit more, let's say to a speed of 10, that should be good there, and we'll increase the size to a value of 1. So when I hit play, if I just start over again, we get far fewer particles, where I still don't have enough here. What I'm actually going to do is move to frame 2 of my simulation where all 25 particles are emitted, and now I can begin to play with the size attribute. Okay, so if we look back at our grid, or our terrain on frame 2, I can go and start to get that size working correctly. So we'll have some fairly large boulders here. And again, we don't want the particles getting in the way of one another. So you can see that when the rigid bodies get too close, they tend to kind of space out like that. So we'll just make sure that our size is very low for now. We'll take our size down a little bit more. And this should still not be too much of a problem, because once we introduce gravity into the equation, the particles should move with a downward force. So let's actually go and do that before we worry too much about their size. I'll add in some forces after the emit from surface compound, but before the simulate rigid bodies. So I'll find my add forces compound and plug that in using the execute output of the add forces, and I'll find a gravity force as well and bring that in and plug it into the force 1 input. So let's see what gravity does to our objects now. So they still actually are too close for comfort. So let's actually go in and make our grid a little larger to account for those different size changes. I might also reduce the number of particles as well. Okay, so if I increase the speed, let's say to 30, the particles are in fact being shot out. In fact, if I move the grid back a little bit, I want them to emit to the point where they're just touching the top of the surface. So they're actually going to use the first frame that they intersect with the ground here and begin the simulation from there. So I can kind of tune the effect by maybe increasing the speed a little bit more. But I have to be careful because I also want the particles to fall. So I have to strike that balance between speed and, of course, distance. So I'll take the speed back down to about 30. And that should work right there. Again, I'll just raise the emitter up enough so that all the particles actually hit the surface. And now what I can do is add the terrain as a surface for the particles to bounce off of. So you'll notice that in the Simulate Rigid Bodies, I could add a geometric object here, which if I press F3 with the ground selected and drag into my graph, I can simply plug in. You'll notice that the particles do interact with the surface, but they don't really see the true shape of the surface. They more see it as a rounded surface. They don't see the undulations. So we can't really use that for a shape like this. We need to use an actual bounce-off surface compound.